The 1930s brought forth a major economic crisis that threatened the future of the nation. Unemployment was widespread as corporate profits fell from $10 billion to $1 billion. The government tried to confront the crisis in multiple areas, however faced dissenting views among Americans on creating a new, thriving economy. Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States, tried to resolve the nation's economic dilemmas through a partnership of business and the federal government known as associationalism. In 1932, the citizens turned to a bright new candidate, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had promised the citizens a new series of policies called the New Deal. He was later elected president, and his New Deal ended up reforming banks, utilities, stock markets, farms, and many businesses, but still left the citizens deprived of basic welfare programs such as Social Security.
Roosevelt's second New Deal was enjoyed by an overwhelming majority of citizens. It enjoyed popular support from most Americans, but was opposed by major business leaders like Al Smith and the disaffected conservative Democrats. They condemned government-regulated taxation and as a result established the American Liberty League to oppose the second New Deal. In an attempt to turn Southern whites against the New Deal and so splinter the Democrat Party, the Liberty League secretly channeled funds to a racist group in the South, which tried to foster protests by circulating pictures of Eleanor Roosevelt with African Americans. The American Liberty League ended up mounting a highly visible campaign against the New Deal radicalism.
Come to us from the state of Michigan that in a congressional election there, the candidate endorsed by Dr. Townsend,
the idea of involving one-half the national income annually in a pension scheme is wild.
It is our estimate that 4% of the American people own Morgan and Mr. Mellon and Mr. Rockefeller back and say, come back here. Put that stuff back on this table here that you took away from here, that you don't need.
At the age of 78. She was 4 times the First Lady of the land and was of the word. Mrs. Roosevelt could join farmers and their wives in a rollicking square dance with the same
Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Wallace, and on the end of the line, Miss Perkins, the Secretary of Labor.
And let me warn the nation against the smooth evasion that says, of course we believe these things.
Roosevelt had created a voter coalition that would shape the Democratic Party for the next 40 years. But as Roosevelt sought re-election, its strength would be tested for the first time. Leading the opposition, the Republican candidate for president.
Alfred Boston Landon of Kansas.
Poor Alf Landon was no match for FDR.
Takes over. What will its record be? 3,500 farms were electrified last year by the private companies and the farmers. 150,000 farms await supply. Equipment is long in delivery, for exports come first. The wide grid system, which lights and warms the cities and drives the countless motors in their factories.
The huge outlets, 6 on the Arizona side and 6 on the Nevada side, spout man-made Niagaras meeting in midstream. A symphony of power.
Difficulties requires quite as high courage and as much enterprise as was displayed by men and women of
was created. One of the programs in the WPA was the Federal Arts Program, which led to the creation of 2,000 the new awareness of and appreciation for American art, and within the short
Something was done. In 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt put his signature on the Social Security Act.
This Social Security measure
to tattoo was taboo a few weeks back. But with the new Social Security idea, in some American states it's all the rage. On my soul, or rather his, the craze for doing things by numbers has got well under their skin. With a nice row of indelible figures on your arm, you're simply you for life. Even if you shouldn't be feeling quite yourself, you can't be anybody else. And a card goes with the number to prove it. If you're a girl of parts, so to speak, you can make a good impression with any of them, and that's straight from the shoulder. Even if you should lose your memory and the last bus, you can't lose your identity with a number on your shoulder.
Rouge lines had never had job security. Now those lucky enough still to have jobs became increasing.
Molten glass becomes clear and even plate. You have the strongest and safest automobile body. Strongest in the world.
The first pictures of strike-paralyzed San Francisco in the grip of a general labor tie-up. Streets are deserted as surface cars cease running, and citizens unable to travel remain indoors. Strike-paralyzed port of San Francisco failed. Open warfare rages through the streets of the city as 3,000 Union pickets battle 700 police. Guns, tear gas, clubs, and fists bring injuries to more than 80 persons and cause the death of 2. Listen to this. An additional violence threatened. 2,500 guardsmen move in, commanded by Colonel Mittelstadt.
The California National Guard has been ordered into active service by our governor.
It begins for the Wagner Act the ordeal of every contested law. Newly organized workers at an Aurora flour mill demand union recognition.
I won't stand for it. I'll close the mills until you're ready to come back as individuals and forget this union business. If you don't recognize our union, you'll complain to the National Labor Relations Board, and they'll prosecute you. All right?
The mill workers' complaint was forwarded to Chairman Madden of the National Labor Relations Board in Washington. Meanwhile, the mill owners, to forestall government prosecution, dispute the constitutionality of the Wagner Act.
by circumventing the die-hard conservatives among the Supreme Court's 9 old members.
Children, keep in the middle of the road. Just keep in the middle of the road.
How long will chromium plate? Great vacuum cups, like the tentacles of Africa's largest motor car manufacturer. 5,000 WIC inspectors and other inspectors checked them.
We owe protection to those men first.
Committee, here's John L. Lewis, head of the United Mine Workers, in a 5.5-hour debate, which
the summer, cold in the winter, hard work.
And then you didn't get no overtime. If you worked it over.
Well, it made a middle class. We could have
one of their constitutional rights. Home is the sit-down. So much security and freedom and dignity. People. Their wives and their children came to the... GM had taken its case to court before... This is not vandalism you see there. They are breaking these windows to let the air in and to let the tear gas...
their wives are threatening to divorce them.
The day before New Year's Eve in 1936, and hundreds of prisoners in Flint and occupied them for 44 days. They were the first union that beat an industrial corporation of the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, sent in.
It was called in May of 1937 to permit this to happen. And a very bloody massacre occurred. One of the people who was there
in front of the mill gate. You can see some of the strikers vigorously arguing with the police. This scene takes place momentarily after a lens change showing the police firing their guns, clubbing the pickets, shooting tear gas. There was a tear gas bomb streaming through the air. If you look closely, you can see the police with their guns in their hand, some of them firing into the backs of the pickets as they struggle to run away from the police. 7 of the 10 men who were killed on that day were shot in the back. The other 3 were shot in the side as they sought to evade the police and to run backwards in the direction from which they had come. There's Loopy Marshall, a social worker from Hull House, being prodded by a police billy club. Workers are down on the field, having been shot. There were 30 others that were injured by bullet wounds that day, as well as approximately 60 more who were clubbed and beaten unmercifully.